Hello, backers. One of the best ways to learn any kind of system is to look at character creation. So I figured builds were of some interest out there. So I will teach you a little bit about making a character in Champions now. Again, this is running with the philosophy that underlies first generation Champions, which is that special effects are what they are without points. And so tons and tons of things that in later versions and in related games are very point-based aren't here. So it may look a little lean to you. First things, in playing Champions now, you're working with some guiding statements for everybody jumping in to make characters. And in this case, it's a little bit grimdark. It's, let's see, powers and superpowers and that stuff is all based on sacrifice and study and practice and discipline and arduous learning and pain, and you kind of maintain it. And it's all very, sweaty. So there's that. And then the other statement has to do with I'm not going to call it genre. That's a bad word in this case. Just some concepts that you throw in with some dramatic potential. And in this case, I'm focusing on ex-military drama, basically. Maybe a couple other words I might use if I were doing this for a game, but I'm thinking a lot about people who have grown up in the world in the last 30 years, and many of whom really have only seen the world from the standpoint of a warfare relationship that people of my generation have a different history with. All right, so we're taking a look at this, and somebody makes a character, and in fact, this comes a little bit from a conversation I had with a backer, which is available on one of the videos. I've tweaked it a lot, thought about it since, messed with it, and this is what I came up with, again, based a little bit on the character that he was talking about. Okay, so this character goes with these three basic interactive concepts: person, powers, and problems. This is just spitballing. This is best what you write, scritchy scratch on a piece of paper. It's not, making a character yet, but it's important. So the personal image that I have is of a kind of rangy build, very Midwestern rural American, maybe from Indiana, a guy who did a fairly extensive military service and is really very much out of place back home. I do not want to dip into sort of the adult, weirded out, vet from movies and stuff, but he kind of leans that way. Definitely isn't fitting in. The whole hold a job thing is not going his way. And he has gotten to the point where he is, well, to an outside viewpoint, kind of wretched, perhaps. Homeless can mean a lot of things, and in his case, it's definitely off the grid, if not absolutely, completely destitute, but not living a normal life, and very indigent, no fixed abode. So, all right, now that I've depressed everybody, this guy, whose name is Daryl, he is also the product of, you guessed it, military experimentation project warrior stuff, which is fine. And he perceives it as being exoskeleton based. The fact is, not really, although he's kind of dependent on that notion and even, uses kind of some junky stuff that he thinks of as his exoskeleton. So, like I said, not completely wrapped all the way tight. But the powers, well, I always think in terms of comics. So I'm thinking about, if you drew a person and then you drew an outline that was sort of, an inch off the person, and it's a nice thick black line, And then inside it, there's kind of a void or a white space between the person and that line. So they're kind of outlined by this. And it's always just one line. So if you look at it from this side and that side, whichever way you're looking at the character in the panel, there's just that one outline line. Figure something hits him, it, sort of bulges or expands into sort of a sphere. That's the effect of the sort of a sphere formation. If he drives his fist through something, it's sphere, it expands, right? It's a sphere around his fist. Anyway, if you grab him or whatever, it would expand and your hand bounces off. So anyway, that's sort of the power thing, and there's some various things he can do with this physical force that he's got associated with his body movements, including some sensory stuff. So I'm getting the idea that we're talking intense situational awareness, to the point where he can kind of perceive wherever in the immediate vicinity. And since he has find weakness, that's a golden opportunity to, find weakness in different places or in individuals that he's not obviously looking at. So that's some aspects of the powers, kind of playing with the idea that this sort of psychological dependence he's got on the exoskeleton-y, bracy, kind of crappy looking, semi-exoskeleton, not like huge clunk clunk, aliens loader type thing, just more like struts and stuff. Enough to look cool, but again, it's pretty low tech to an observer, mainly because it doesn't do anything. Well, anyway, what about problems? Well, I've kind of mentioned some. He's obviously kind of got a snake pit head going on, and I'm going to work with that some more. For example, a couple of psychological limitations that are a little off, but not irrational, just in terms of, coping with life and being dependent on thinking that he's got this kind of prosthetic or, thing that isn't. And then also a couple of irrational ones. And again, I want to steer away from already going into that, kooky homeless vet thing. And I kind of want to steer away from that and not make him a wacko. But it's true that he's a little irrational about one or two things. And so he's got a couple of those psychological situations as well. And then that ties nicely into an enrage. And that ties nicely as well into a situation called side effect, which is where you get points equal to the power of a power which affects you in a particular situation. A lot like a psychological limitation, except you're getting hit with a power with special effects of its own. In this case, now this is where things get even weirder. The one of his hunters is actually the coalescence of bad memories. And it's actually formed into a being who's after him. I'm going to call it the Slain. And so when his irrational responses are kicked off in play, then his side effects kick in, which is images, right, that are affecting him of the Slain. And so, one of these days, the implication is that these images are going to come together enough to come and get him. So, he's haunted by this. So we're getting kind of an idea. He's a bit of a whacked hero. Again, we're talking this kind of grimdark and edgy, I'm thinking underground comics kind of artwork with scratchies and stuff, lots of ink. Is this what Champions Now is supposed to look like? Champions Now is supposed to look like your superhero comic, and I'm presenting several different styles and parameters for play in the book, so this is one of them. All right, so I'm calling the character Aura, A-U-R-A, well, because of the, surrounded by an aura. And not only that, but I'm figuring that in this game, the super names aren't really what they call themselves. It's only what their files say in the military project somewhere. Well, a few other things that go with this. But you can see that I call the point bank that you build with things like hunteds and identities and stuff like that is that they've had several names throughout the editions. I thought and 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 I finally came upon the one I liked, which is situations. Because when you look at this bank of stuff about a character, player, and game master independently should be thinking, what kind of situations do these things create independently or in concert for this character? And you pretty much should be building the framing of scenes and activities and proactive notions of what the character may be doing from those. Well, with that said, Aura has a total of 230 points, 130 gained from the situations. And I haven't outlined them all, but you can look at the list. And then you also have what we do with these. Okay, build at last, at last, at last. You see how I moved from person power problems pretty much totally organically into the points, and I want to emphasize that that's how it's supposed to work, that when you are looking at person power problems and then what the points are thought of is, okay, all those are special effects. Everything about the character is special effect at the moment, and then you sort of decide which ones you want to harden or solidify into point-based expression. So I already did that with the situations, mostly. And you can skip back and forth around the different pieces. What do we have for characteristics? There are two characteristics which I have shifted into being rated in dice rather than numbers. And that's pretty obvious what they are. It's strength and presence, and the conversion is still the same, except it's not a conversion anymore. It's 5 points for a die, and you're done. So you now say, instead of 30 strength, that you say you have 6 strength. Okay, fine. Do the same for presence. In this case, I kind of like the idea that Aura's presence is quite high when he's got his aura on, partly because of an impressiveness, but it totally changes his demeanor. I mean, he walks different, he deals with people different, he's looks very dominant in these circumstances, whereas if he's not doing this, then he definitely has that low affect, not causing any trouble, wait, where did he go kind of thing about him. Well, so that means that I'm going to buy presence on a limitation. Talk about the limitations in a moment. So those are 5 points per die, with a base of 2 dice each, which should sound familiar. Now things get weird, because that was just a more terminological, get rid of the whole Goodman school of cost effectiveness. There's no 3 points anything anymore. You want to die, pay 5 points, get over it. Okay, what about the rest of the characteristics? Well, intelligence, dexterity, and ego are no longer expressed as values in a kind of raw way. They are only expressed as their rolls. So you have a base of 11, and then you can buy up the roll, and there is no ego 15, ego 20, ego 25. That's all gone. Now it's all just the roll, and a great deal of the rules have been sort of trimmed and sanded so that they just point straight to the rolls now, and we're done. So in his case, I'm seeing him as a very physically oriented character, and so I'll pop the dexterity up to 13 or less, which, if you want to back convert, isn't very hard, because you're talking about a dexterity of anywhere from 18 to 22 in the standard notation. So okay, it's pretty equivalent in every other way. It's pretty equivalent in combat. In these circumstances, it's pretty and in fact, if you look at dexterity and speed together, you'll find out that the combined costs tend to be pretty similar. Did I say speed? I did. Hold on just a moment. So dexterity and intelligence and ego, I'm going to leave at their base of 11, and they won't cost me any points. Now, what about these other things? Because there aren't very many more characteristics. There is speed. The speed chart has been sliced down to 6 and has a different pattern now, which I'm quite happy with, and the way it plays. And the base is 1. So an ordinary person or the character for no points has a speed of 1. and you have to buy up from there. And dexterity has nothing to do with it. You want your speed, you just go ahead and buy up your speed. And in this circumstance, I know it sounds weird, but Aura's speed of 3 is pretty much in the 5-ish range in the old 12 segment setup. You could, get a speed of 5 or 6 in this system that I've got, but it would be about as cost effective and also as risky, particularly for endurance, as getting an enormous speed of 9 or 10 or something like that would be in the old system. So it's pretty much equivalent, but the points are somewhat pared down and their usage is turned into this other chart. The costs are extremely straightforward. There's the 5 per d6 for strength and presence. Everything else is just 10s. So you want a dexterity roll of 12, then you pay 10 points. You want a speed of 3 with a base of 1, then you're going to pay 20 points. So it's just 10s. Then there are a couple of others. There's defense, which is different in cost. I just said everything's 10s. Well, except for defense. Characters have a defense of 10 base, and they can buy it up at a 1-for-1. This is non-resistant defense. There is no physical energy defense anymore. It's just defense. And if you want more of it, you can have it. If you want resistant, then you can have that too, which is much more expensive. You can upgrade what you've got into resistant, which is also expensive, but the costs are pretty straightforward. In his case, I'm leaving it where it is, so that means, obviously, we're going to be looking to those powers for something resembling defense or else. All right, so we've got that. Then we have body. I've been saving this one. Body is a lot more complex. In fact, it's a subset of the characteristics now. Because you have a base 10 of body, and you can buy them up for 10 points each, and recovery, and the what used to be called 2 times constitution, which was the number you can take, or the number which might stun you, basically. And I'm just calling that stun. Change name there. That's not stun like stun. This is stun meaning how you get stunned. So it's named, I think, terrifyingly differently for a person familiar with the system, but for anybody else coming to it, it makes sense that the thing that determines whether you're stunned or not is called stunned. Okay, so there's that value. And then there's also what we used to call stun, which is the points that are done to you, after which you go, ooh, and fall over. And that is now called, you guessed it, knockout. Hard thing to get used to if you're shifting over to play this from the other games, but again, pretty intuitive if you just arrived there. So recovery, which is equal to body, stunned, which is twice body, and then knockout, which is 3 times body, and I'm sure you can see this coming, endurance, which is 4 times body. So if you buy your body up to 14, which I have done for Aura, which is really, really high. I mean, this is massive energy to burn character levels. Super, blazing with force that a lot of other characters don't have. That costs him 40 points from a base of 10, and he gets all those things. So he gets the multiples for all those others, and you don't buy recovery or any of the other things independently at all. So a little cleaner and maybe a little hard to wait, I can't buy it up or down. No, you can't. It's okay. It actually works really, really well. How about skills? Skills follow the old model. The only skills that are listed are the super skills, crazy stuff, computer programming's to redo alien computers, and stealth is wicked, movie stealth or comic book stealth. It's not like being stealthy ordinarily, it's kooky stealth. So all of the skills are those skills. There's only 5 of those, and they are real over the top. All other skills, everything that just goes with what kind of character your character is and what languages they speak, and all sorts of things. Familiarity, professional school skills, education level, tons of stuff. All that. It's free because that's the way it was, and it works. So we have that, and we take a look at this guy's skills. Well, what do we see? First of all, he doesn't have any of those over-the-top skills. He's not like a ninja commando, whatever. He was experimented on and has these abilities, but he doesn't, he wasn't like in a crack operative squad that was trained up through, 10 years of secret training or something. It does have find weakness, which in this case, in this setup, is a subset of martial arts. Martial arts comes in 3 10-point packages. Package 1 gives you the attacks, extra dice for punches and kicks, plus the funky maneuvers that go with those, which are a little bit more generous than ordinary, punching and blocking and stuff. So, blocking and dodging and martial throw, and another one which actually permits you to move after striking. That's the other martial arts package, and those are the martial moves. And so then the third one is find weakness in and of itself. It's very, very blocky, very coarse. You may have noticed this throughout. The blocks of the build in Champions Now are easily 5 or 6 times the size of the blocks that you may be used to. Well then, we have the find weakness, and that's going to be with his kind of the blast extension of his aura. And we have a +1 skill level with coordinated attacks. Yes, and we also have this thing called mental discipline, which is another 10-point package, and it gives you these maneuvers that you can use with your ego. So that might say, well, whoa, does he have all these ego-based powers? Well, not necessarily, actually. The ego-based maneuvers are doable. They certainly can be combined with ego usage, for powers and things, but they're also useful in just dealing with attacks of that kind and with a couple of other things. So he has, for example, one of the maneuvers, which is called self-mastery, is if anybody's using a mental attack on you, then you have the capacity to ego attack back to drop its level. So you can kind of fight back in ways other people can't. So the ego maneuvers are a nice little package, and he has those. And so this is coming from the training that was necessary for him to develop these powers and to use them and to continue to use them. So, all of a sudden you may be getting a slightly more sympathetic view of his wonkiness, because that's the idea. He's so focused on maintaining these powers that he's kind of let a few other things, slip. So the next up, we have powers. Cool. Now you can take a look at this thing, awareness, which is one of these powers that has lots of different sort of levels and ways to slice it and stuff like that. He has a basic form of awareness, which is effectively situational, compensates for a loss in ordinary sight if he's in darkness and stuff like that, and makes it real hard to be sneaked up on. In this case, it's an extension of his aura, and he also has to pay endurance for it, which you ordinarily don't for awareness. So that sort of reflects the intensity of using these powers. And he also has the capacity to analyze information from it, which is sort of above and beyond what you can do with just, for example, being able to see. So now this character is starting to look a little bit wicked in a combat situation with this particular complex of skills. Taking a look at the powers themselves, you can see how the awareness ties back to the skills. Tossed in some knockback defense. Knockback is a big deal in Champions Now, and knockback defense is a cool thing. I mean, if you have it and nobody else does, it's going to be extremely apparent in any fight situation. And he does. It has a lot to do. Again, I've got the visuals of this aura just right. I'm thinking of something that hits and topples this person and that person over and blows them across the street or, through the window or something. And, and he's, sort of does the little skid backward, bracing against it. So you've got your knockback defense. So then what about this other thing? I have maintained all three of the basic frameworks. Variable power pool, multi-power, which I'm now calling multi-form, and it's the most changed of the bunch, and maybe it'll be hard to get used to that, and then elemental control. The points for variable power pool and elemental control really aren't very different. Some of the terminology has changed, perhaps to be a little bit more intuitive or easy to just mess with the numbers quickly, but they're not that different. Whereas multiform is quite different and much, much more limited. Most of the things that you would have called a multi-power in the past would be one of the other frameworks now, with the various options they have. And since Aura has an elemental control, I'll just let the whole multiform question, slip past, and everybody goes, wait, what was that? Well, you'll see. And in the case of Aura, you've got several interesting things. I put in the neat idea that none of it is on a blanket limitation, but certain reliable applications of what he can do are on the limitation of having that exoskeleton, and others are not. So the idea being that if that gets broken or grabbed or taken from him, then he can still use the powers, but they're diminished in their reliability with things like burnout and a few other limitations that make it troublesome for him. So it's very much a matter of, the aura being harder for him to control without sort of the psychological crutch. I don't like giving heroes focus. And there's very specific advice about that in my edition of the 3rd edition Champions, and I follow it pretty much to the letter, rightly pointing out that my power as an object is not actually either a justification or an obligation to take the focus limitation. In fact, most of the objects that you know from the comics aren't a focus. So the whole point of a focus is not that it might be taken away, which can happen to an object based on special effects, but that it will. And I have shaved focus down. There's no such thing as an inaccessible focus anymore. The idea being that if it's a focus, let's just get over it. It means that it's gettable. Period. So he's got this, obvious thing on and appears to be using it. It looks like he's using it. And if you take it, then yeah, he's going to have trouble. His presence is going to have problems and his powers are going to be less reliable. But it doesn't fully go away. And there's other things that are perfectly fine without it. So I want to point out the awareness, for example, costs endurance, but he doesn't need the exoskeleton for it. So that's as far as I'm going to go with a focus for a hero, is aspects and modulations of a bank of powers, but not, the powers in the thing, and I'm going to, have it, and that's that. So even though the character may think that, and the special effects may imply such a thing, it's not how the build should go for a hero. All right, that's pretty much Aura. Looking at the total, you'll see that he comes to 230 points. Champions Now scales down slightly, and points are a little more valuable, I should say, in Champions Now. So therefore, for the kinds of heroes you may have been familiar with from other hero system with 250 points, 200 to 240 will give you a nice beefy hero. And I recommend leaving the range open a little bit. I mean, if you want to say to your party or your group or whatever, hey guys, we're just going to do 240 points flat, and that's that. That's okay. Or 200 points flat, and that's that. That's okay. But if you let everybody just wiggle between 200 and 240, you may be surprised. They really aren't going to be all that unbalanced. Furthermore, there's another number that you should be paying attention to. It's the ratio. And the ratio is taking the whole character without limitations. Leave the frameworks there. So the prepay on an elemental control or the slots in a multi-power, whatever. You're not like taking the active points of every power that they've got. You're just looking at the character. What would their cost be without the limitations? I'm not saying build them without the limitations and consider the character. No, I'm just talking math. Just take away the limitations, tell me what you got. Now take the ratio of that number over what the character costs, and you will find a number. I multiply it by 100 because it's easier to think about, so there's not a decimal to get in my face. 119 is the maximum for a hero in Champions now for that ratio. And that's a big deal, actually. There you have it. A couple of points. One might say, well, what about, non-powered characters and cosmically powered characters or whatever? And I would really like you to focus back on that original Champions, which made no such distinctions whatsoever. That it was perfectly okay to be a circus acrobat with a trick bow, and if you had as many points as, the dude in the powered armor, you did. And it played out in a different profile of how they were built through the character, but you still had them. You were just as powerful a character as that character, particularly if you played toward the strengths, just like that other player was doing. And so, really, there is no scaling of points to some in-fiction notion of has powers, doesn't have powers, is trained, or whatever. That's just not in the picture in the concepts of play. Well, I hope this was kind of interesting, alarming perhaps here and there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Obviously, I'm not going to sort of answer every last little thing, but I can answer lots. And I hope you enjoyed it, and take a look and see what you think of sort of the point structure and how it's different and the same. It should teach a lot about the system just by checking it out. Thank you for your time, and I will talk to you later.